Hello and happy Tuesday, everyone. As the fall colors abound and we get closer into a winter season, home is ever more present and important. We're going into the 8th or 9th month of all sheltering in place and spending more and more time at home. And you would think that by now we would have learned a few tech lessons about the Zoomiverse that we all find ourselves in. So I want to apologize to you beforehand because we're still working out some technical glitches with running live video over a webinar. I promise. Stay tuned because next week we're going to figure this out and there's going to be no more choppy videos. I promise. And stay through the choppy video because one, it's got great information, and two, the best part of At Home with Joseph is his Q&A section afterwards. Thank you very much. Happy Tuesday, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Welcome to my home, where I'm going to be videoing a new series all about domestic authenticity. I hope to share many ideas to inform and inspire you to live a full life, from cooking and baking to gardening and entertaining. Since the early 1900s, the concept of home economics has inspired a holistic approach to how we live and entertain in our homes. I encourage you to find your own vision of creativity within yours so that you can feel pride in the connection that you create with it. Join me as we explore Life at Home with Joseph.
Hey everybody, today we're going to be making some of my favorite doughs for the holidays. I've picked 3 of my recipes here that I'm going to share with you guys, and thank you for registering. As you know, you guys are going to be getting all 3 recipes via email for joining today, and I've picked these doughs specifically because they are very easy to be frozen. I make these all the time. I keep them in my freezer so that when I'm entertaining or even during the holidays, I don't have to go through that step because I'm going to be making so much other food. It really makes life a lot easier just to be able to pull it out of the freezer, let it thaw, and then work with it. My very first dough that I'm going to share with you is a basic pie tart dough. A pâté brisé is a very classical French pastry. So it's very important when you're working with pastry dough to work with very cold ingredients. So we're going to start out with some butter that I've prepared, already chilled in the refrigerator. And when I'm making my pastry doughs, I usually make 3 or 4 at a time. And like I said, I like to freeze them. And it allows me to get all of the ingredients out at once, mise en place them all in front of me so that my tools are by my task. And when I'm portioning out the butter, I use these great labels that are found at like an office supply store, and you can write on them with a Sharpie. And you can label your ingredients for what recipe you're actually working with. So these are very handy to use when you're baking. First, we're going to start with 3 3/4 cups of pre-sifted flour. When you're scooping your flour into your cup, you don't want to pack it in. You want to just loosely get it in there. Give it a few taps. And I like to scrape mine off to make it nice and level with an offset spatula. 1½ teaspoons of salt. When I'm baking, I prefer to use sea salt, a very fine sea salt. I think it imparts a much better flavor than just a regular table salt. 1 tablespoon of sugar. It also calls for 1/2 cup of water with some lemon juice. I have my water here in a water bath to keep it nice and cold. Again, you want to work with very cold ingredients. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sift our flour together with all of the ingredients. And using my cold butter, I'm going to pour all of the butter right into the flour. And we're going to break the flour into the butter. And we're going to work very quickly. You don't want the butter to warm up too much while you're making this. And the first step when I'm breaking up the butter with the flour, I don't worry about breaking it into small pieces just yet. I want to get the butter mashed in with the flour. Then I can work it a little bit better with my fingers once that's done. Okay, so now that I've got my dough just to the texture that I want it to be, you want it to be sort of a cornmeal-y type of a texture so that the butter is worked into the flour, but you want a lot of large pieces in here. Because what's going to happen is the butter, the larger pieces of the butter, it's going to create air pockets in the flour as it bakes, which is going to give you that nice, crispy, light, flaky crust. This is a half a cup of ice cold water with the juice of 1 lemon mixed into it. Just going to make a well in the middle of my flour mixture. I'm going to pour this in. I'm not going to quite put all of it in. I start to lightly mix it with a spoon because I don't quite want to get the heat of my hands in there just yet. Once it starts to incorporate, I'll go in and I'll start bringing the dough together. I'm going to spread some flour on my cutting board. I'm just going to knead the dough a little bit to finish bringing it together. So I'm going to cut this in half. And this is going to make 2 pie or tart shells. And all I'm going to do is turn these into 2 small discs to get them ready to freeze. Once we've got them shaped, we're just going to wrap them with some parchment paper. And then we're going to wrap them very well in saran wrap. And then I like to put mine in a Ziploc bag, make sure they're labeled pie dough. And then these can actually be frozen like this and pulled out probably about 3 hours before you're ready to use them. And the nice thing about freezing them is that they will be ice cold when you're ready to roll them out. So they'll be perfect to use. So the next dough we're going to do is actually a galette dough. And you can use a galette dough for any number of dishes. I think of it sort of like a pizza would be, right? A flat dough, and then you've got the toppings on top, and the dough comes over on the side. Today's dough that I'm sharing is a cornmeal galette dough. This is ingredients for a double recipe, which is going to be 2 cups of flour, half of a cup of cornmeal, 2 teaspoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, buttermilk, along with ice water, and cold butter. So we're going to get our cold butter out of the refrigerator. And I am going to, again, get all my butter in there, and I'm going to work my butter into the flour before I add any of the liquid. And as we're bringing this dough together, the galette dough is going to be a little bit wetter of a dough than a pie dough. It's got a little bit more liquid to it. The more you work with dough, the more you can actually feel the texture of it to know when it's been worked properly and when it's been overworked. When a dough starts to feel very gelatinous, like it's springing back in your fingers, you know you're starting to overwork it too much. So the best practice is just to stop, throw this in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes, let the gluten and the flour relax, and then come back and work with it for the rest of the way that you need to. So we're going to do the same thing with this dough. we are going to wrap it in the discs in our parchment paper. Each disc will then be sealed in saran wrap. And then for further protection, I usually put them in a Ziploc bag, and make sure you label your dough so you know what you're doing. So the third and final recipe that we're going to be doing today is a quiche dough. And this is a recipe that I got from a friend of mine from Brooklyn, New York, my friend Helen. She had a wonderful shop there and made the most amazing quiches. And I was lucky enough that she taught me her recipes for this. So I'm going to be sharing this recipe with you, and probably in a subsequent web series, we're actually going to do a quiche for you. And if I can, maybe I can get Helen to do a guest appearance with us. So our dough is coming together. Now this dough was 2 cups of flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, a half a teaspoon of salt, 2 lemons for zesting, 3/4 of a cup of unsalted chilled butter, 3 hard-cooked egg yolks, and the final addition as the liquid is going to be 2 egg whites. And it's really the egg whites in this recipe, along with the hard-cooked egg yolks that are in this, that are really going to give it a nice, rich, silky texture to it. And we're just going to knead it together till it all comes together as one nice solid dough. So if I'm making any of these doughs fresh to be used the day that I'm making them, you really want to give them a good long rest in the refrigerator for the gluten and the flour to really relax. Otherwise, when you're rolling it out, your dough is going to start shrinking on you. It's not going to fit in the pan. So I usually give my doughs a good 2 to 3 hours in the refrigerator if I'm going to use it that day. So I'll make the dough in the morning and finish the dish later on that day. So now that we've completed all of our doughs, my mother has asked if she can make an apple pie with one of them. Say hello to the camera. So I have my trusted assistant over there, remember, who I taught everything I know, peeling apples for an apple pie. And I'm going to show you how we roll out one of the doughs and actually put it into a pie dish. We are going to lightly flour it, lightly flour the top. You also want to give your rolling pin a good amount of flour. When you are rolling a pastry dough, you always want to start from the middle of the dough and roll out in either direction. You never want to go back and forth like this. So you want to roll it out from the middle out. Give it a quarter turn and do the same thing. And at this point, if I see that the edges are getting crinkly like this around here, I will just lightly push these ends in with my fingers, just so that my finished dough will have a nice clean edge around it. It also gives me an opportunity to feel what parts of my dough are thinner than the other. And you probably noticed that my dough was a little bit oval when I first started. If it is, you're just going to work it an extra roll in the same direction to balance it out. And you can see by sticking with doing from the middle out, you get a nice even circle with your dough. So you can see here how this is inching in. So we're going to straighten that out. I'm literally just pushing the dough in and crimping it with my fingers. And you don't want to handle the dough for too long, or else it's going to warm up too much. And without a lot of pressure, I'm going to finish the shape of my dough. So rather than overhandling the dough because you don't want it to tear, you just want to lightly fold it over. It's nice and floured, so it's not going to be sticky. And put your pie plate right next to your dough. So move the dish to the dough, don't move the dough to the dish. And then gently pick it up at the part where it's folded so that it's on the thicker side and not the thinner side of the crust. And then just very carefully and gently unfold your dough. And I'm just going to lightly roll it almost till it's inside the dish. So not on the rim, but in front of the rim on the inside. I've got the dough nicely folded over under into itself, so it makes a nice little crust. There's different ways of doing this. The way I like to do it is I like to hold the dough with my first finger and my thumb and pinch in front of my finger and keep moving down the line. Don't worry about it not being perfect on the outside. We're going to fix that as soon as it's all done. It's always best to put a pie dough in the oven when it's nice and chilled and the butter's cold. It creates a lot of steam in the dough to give it a nice flaky texture. Okay. There's a beautifully crimped pie dough. Try one, make a couple batches of it, freeze it, and see really for yourself how easy it is when you do prepare like that, how much easier life is when it comes time to preparing for the holidays or entertaining, that half of your work is already done for you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining again. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. I'm gonna try to answer as many as I can today. And just a reminder, every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, we're gonna be doing these home economics series, and next week is going to be all about making an autumn wreath. So please make sure you join us next week. And you can always follow me, like me, tweet me. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We just developed a YouTube channel that all of these videos are going to go on. And if you know anybody who missed the video but would like to see it, Aspire Design and Home is also going to be linking to the live series as well. So follow me on social media. We'll have more stories on there too. And if I don't get to any questions today, I will either do a live Instagram answering your questions or I'll put them in my stories. So it's great to always check in on social media to see what we're up to. So I've got some questions coming in. And the first one somebody sent, Alice asked that, why do I use European butter? So there are two ingredients for me that are very important in baking. One is the flour and the other is the butter. These are two ingredients that you do not want to skimp on. And there's two reasons for that. I use European butter when I bake because it has a higher fat content and a lower water content. European butter is from about 82 to 86% of butter fat. So it has a lower water content, whereas your regular store-bought butter is about 80%. So it has a higher water content, and that can add to creating a soggier baked product. So the higher fat content, the more steam it creates in the dough, and the flakier and the lighter product that you'll get. And then the other thing is the flour. So my choice is always to use King Arthur flour. I think they're a very consistent brand. They have a higher level of protein in their flours. So flour is made up of starch and protein. And most of the flours on the market are around a 10% protein. King Arthur is about 11.5%. So it gives a little bit more structure to baked products. A really old flour company is White Lily. They have a very low protein content. They're about 7 to 8, maybe 9%. So I don't like that as much. If you're making something that requires a lot of sponge or a very soft texture, it's okay to use that. But I like a flour that will create a nice bite and a nice texture when I'm biting into it. And it is the protein that will develop that. Another question that came in, I still use my grandmother's old rolling pin. That's fabulous. I love heirlooms like that. If any of you have them, you should absolutely use them. Don't leave them in a drawer. They are meant to be used, just like our family and friends that came before us who use them all the time. I do not use a rolling pin with handles on it. It's just a solid round rolling pin. For me, I can feel a better pressure on the dough when I'm rolling it out with that, and I can use the pressure in the middle or on the sides as needed, whereas with handles, you're putting your pressure on either side. So sometimes the middle is not getting the pressure that it needs. One is not better than the other. It's just my preference. This is such a gorgeous crust. Thank you so much. Do you ever use lard with pie dough? So it's funny you say that. I call my mother the Crisco queen and I'm the butter boy. I do not use lard in pie dough. It's not that it's wrong. You can use it. I think it tends to give a much floury taste to a crust that you do not get from butter. So I think butter adds a little bit of richness that I prefer. Next question. Unfortunately, I was 11 minutes. Oh, that's okay. There's not a way to rewind the video. So the video will be posted on YouTube, on my channel, which is At Home with Joseph. The video will also be posted on Aspire Design and Home. Those are two places that you can check it out afterwards, and they will stay up indefinitely. But if you watch the videos and you do have any questions, you can feel free to message me on Instagram. I would say probably by maybe Thursday, and I will try to live stream or answer your questions in my stories on Instagram. Let's see, next question is, what kind of pie dish is your favorite? Great question. One of my favorite all-time pie dishes, and I never use anything different than that, is Emile Henry. It's a French company. Their pie dishes are fantastic. And I prefer to use, you saw that one that had those fluted edges. It helps to really make a nice crust, but it's deep. I like pies that are deep. I don't like those very thin pie dishes. So I prefer to use those, and that is all that I ever use when doing pies. Next question, do you ever use lard with pie dough? Just answered that one. Let's see. And the answer to that was, I do not use lard with pie dough. What's the longest you should freeze your dough for? So doughs can be kept in a freezer for up to 6 months. If you haven't used it after 6 months, I would probably get rid of it or use it for something. It'll start to get freezer burn at that point, and then it's just not going to turn out right. But you do have a little bit of time that you can freeze doughs for. And usually what I do is, as I described in the video, I'll spend a day making different batches of doughs, label them and put them in the freezer, so that when I'm entertaining or when the holidays come around, that part of that is done for me. I don't even have to do it. I can just pull it out, let it thaw, and half of the work is already finished. Next question, can you provide materials we should get so we can make the wreath along with you next week? That's a great question. And I can definitely put out a list of all of the materials that I end up using to make the wreath and where I sourced them from. Would be happy to do that. I don't know that we have the ability to actually provide, as part of the webinar yet, the actual materials, because we would have to ship them out to you. But I will definitely give a source list. I'd be happy to. Thank you for the question. Where did you grow up and when did you start baking? Who taught you? My mother's probably chuckling right now. I grew up in Albany, New York, and ever since I was a little kid, I loved to bake. I actually was teased and nicknamed Betty Crocker at a very young age. And so I loved doing it. I didn't really know what I was doing, but my mother baked all the time. She made cakes and pies, and especially at Thanksgiving, I think every year my mother probably made 20 to 25 pies, no lie. So I loved baking. And actually, as I got older, I really did not like doing it. It was too precise for me. And even when I went to culinary school, I was not that interested in baking. But the older that I got, I just grew a fond love for it. And it's something that I just love doing. It's very precise. You really get into a meditative state when you're doing it. And so because I lost that interest middle of my life, I almost had to reteach myself how to do it. Let's see. Do you put butter on the top of the crust when you bake it? Great question. Yes, I do. I actually melt butter, and I will either put it around the rim, or if I'm doing a covered pie like an apple pie, if there is a crust on it, I will brush melted butter on it. And I actually will put that back into the oven to let that butter, or back into the refrigerator to let that butter thicken up before I put it into the oven, because I want it to really stick to the crust and not just roll off going right into the heat of the oven. Let's see, warming the dough is always my biggest problem. So the problem with that is if you're letting a dough thaw, you're just letting it thaw for too long. So usually what I do is I will take a dough out of the freezer, leave it out on the counter for about 3 or 4 hours, and then put it in the refrigerator for about an hour or two. That will firm it up, that will keep it cold, so that when you pull it out, you can work with it right away while it's cold. If you're finding that it's too warm, you're just leaving it out too long. So, and you can also thaw a dough in the refrigerator overnight. If you know you're going to use it the next day, it'll be perfectly thawed in the refrigerator by the next day. Do you notice a difference using organic versus commercial eggs? Absolutely. I notice a huge difference. I use free-range organic eggs that are usually fed a non-GMO diet. The yolks are always bigger, they always have more color, and that does add, when you're making a dough that requires egg yolk, it does always make a difference. Even when you're making cookies and breads, the eggs can add, is sort of a leavening agent. So it gives you some fat, but it also lightens up your batters. And I always find that anything more organically grown or raised is always better to use. The next question is, why do you prefer using unsalted butter? You never want to use salt in butter in anything that you bake. Most baking recipes will always include salt. And so you never want the addition of that salt in the butter. There's a lot of people that it doesn't make a difference for, but to me, I feel like you can notice a distinct difference. There is not any specific range that brands of butters have standards of quality that they add salt to. So one brand may include more salt and one brand may not, and then you're going to get an inconsistent product every time, and you're going to be wondering, why does this taste different than last time? So the idea is to create consistency, so always use unsalted butter. Pastry flour, do you use it? Yes, I do. When I am making very delicate pastries, you do not want to use all-purpose flour when you're making petit fours, or a lot of times pâté choux. I will add some pastry flour to it because I want a little bit more softness to it. Sometimes you can cut all-purpose flour with pastry flour for some recipes, but I do use it, but it has a very specific use, so I don't use it a lot. If you would like to make pies ahead of time for Thanksgiving, should you freeze the whole pie unbaked? I would not do that. I don't think you would get a very good quality pie with that. What I would suggest is when you're done with the dough, if you have your pie dish, you can actually freeze your dough right in the pie dish. So put it in the refrigerator, let it rest, roll it out, crimp it into your pie dish, and then cover it with some saran wrap and put that in your freezer. And you've got another step that's already done. So if you're making a couple pies and you've got the space in your freezer, by all means do that. But I am from a very old school that anything made fresh the day of is always going to taste the best. So try to make as much of it as you can the day that you're actually going to be serving it. Let's see. Do you brown your crust before you put the filling in? It depends on what kind of pie I'm making. Some pies that are filled pies, like a chocolate cream pie or a banana cream pie, require that you pre-bake the crust because those pies are usually, the filling is cooked and then added to the pie. So you want to bake the pie dough ahead of time before putting those ingredients in. For other pies that will, the batter inside of it needs to cook, you will put that into a raw pie shell and then you will bake that in an oven. But it really just depends on what kind of recipe you're using. Let's see, any tips on taking the pie to the pastry? Oh, to the party, sorry, can't read today. Any tips on taking the pie to the party in a train or a car? Yes, actually, when I had my shop in Atlanta, I used to sell these amazing linen carriers. They were like 2 pockets on either side with handles, and they perfectly carried a pie dish. You can probably source something like that online through Amazon. But I usually just wrap mine with a piece of parchment paper on top and then saran wrap around that. And I'll carry it on like a wooden tray or something. But there's different ways to transport it, whatever would be easiest for you. But I would say it's going to be something that you have to literally carry in your hands. You can't sling it over your shoulder. Thank you for the question. I see you use some kind of rollout mat. That's a great question. So that is called a rule pat, and it's a silicone mat similar to a Silpat, which is what you would bake cookies on. So it's a reusable silicone mat that you use for baking, and they make them in larger sizes that you can use for rolling out a dough. And it's called a rule pat, R-O-U-L-P-A-T. You can get them probably on Amazon. But they're fantastic for rolling out dough. So if you've ever seen the old-fashioned kind of that white opaque thing that rolls up and it's got all the printed dough circles on it, if you've ever used one, they just roll up on you while you're using it and they never stay flat. A rule pat can be rolled up and it will always lay flat on your surface. So it helps because you can use less flour when you're on the work surface because it is a silicone-based mat. So they're fantastic to use. I recommend them. Another story, let's see, or another question. Does Helen still have her store in Brooklyn? Helen does not, unfortunately. Helen is now retired. She's a very good friend of mine. But I would say Helen was one of my inspirations to really get full into baking. She's a phenomenal baker and has taught me a lot about baking that I didn't know, which was that baking is a very interactive process. So it's not like cooking where you can set it and forget it. Baking requires your constant attention the whole time and understanding the process as it's unfolding so that you can learn how to better bake your product. But her shop was very widely regarded around Brooklyn and in New York. So I do miss that and I do miss her, but hopefully we can get her on for another series her and I can do a quiche bake-off. Next question. Do you ever put whipped cream on your pies? If so, have any tips for making it delicious? Yes, I do put whipped cream on many of my pies, especially filled pies that are cream-based, like a chocolate cream pie or a banana cream pie. I use fresh, heavy cream when I can, if I can source it directly from a farmer, a milk farmer. I would try to do that either through a farmer's market or a higher end grocery store like a Whole Foods or a fresh market. It definitely is not as pasteurized as a store-bought heavy cream. But I don't add a lot to my heavy creams. I don't think they need it. I add a little bit of sugar, sometimes maybe a few drops of vanilla, but for me, I love a very clean tasting heavy cream. So sugar and heavy cream and beat it together. And I mean, you can't get anything more delicious than that. What was your shop in Atlanta? What was it named, called, and what did you sell? I had a shop in Atlanta that I owned for 4 years, and it was in the Glenwood Park neighborhood, which is by Grant Park. And it was a home and entertaining shop. So I made homemade prepared foods. I also sold packaged gourmet products. And we had a whole section of the store that we sold things that I personally use when I bake and entertain. So platters, the roll pats, the pie dishes that I use, rolling pins, dishware, serving pieces. It was a whole collection of things in the store. I really wanted it to feel like it was a bit of a European experience. And then we also did cooking demonstrations and classes, and we did private events there. So I really did love that shop. But now we live in St. Petersburg, and I don't have it anymore. The next question. This was such a great lesson. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Alice. Thank you for joining. And like I said, if you need any more information, or if you've missed anything, watch the videos and feel free to message me on Instagram. You can private message me, and I will post those on either my stories or do a live Instagram feed for you. And you guys will be getting copies of all 3 recipes that I did make. And if you ever have a question about them, please don't hesitate to message me. My Instagram is @HomeWithJoseph, as well as Facebook is also @HomeWithJoseph, and so is YouTube @HomeWithJoseph. And I believe I'm also on Twitter, and I just set that up, but I believe it's @HomeWithJoseph too. I think I have 2 accounts on there. But make sure you find me on social media, follow, like, please subscribe to YouTube. The more subscribers we get, the more geared we can make our channel towards what you're looking for. And please always message me any ideas that you'd like to learn about. I'm always willing to entertain ideas that we can do for these webinars. So if you have any great ideas, send them over. And thank you so much for joining, and we will see you next week. Have a great day.